Well, thank you for the opportunity.
Speaker Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And you were talking about the swing states, you know, with the electoral college now, and that's where most of the campaigning goes on, in those swing states, and in the larger states, California, Florida, Texas. Even with the popular vote, don't you feel the population, because there's so much more population, candidates will still spend most of their time in those states and most of their resources in those states?
That's an excellent question, and let me kind of correct one thing. The three largest states are California, Texas, and New York. The presidential candidates didn't spend any time there except to raise money. As a Californian, I can tell you, I didn't see a presidential candidate in 2008 at all. But the question of a national popular vote, I'll use my own election process as an example. In California, my state Senate seat had 1 million people in it. I actually got more votes than the governors of 7 states, and and governors and U.S. senators from 7 states. My biggest city was 400,000 people. I always lost my biggest city. I didn't campaign as much there as I campaigned in the rest of my district. That city was 40% of my district. I did some campaigning there because I wanted to make sure I stayed close. But I got my votes, actually, I got 87% of the votes in the San Diego part of my district. Trust me, I spent a lot of time with those folks because I built my vote count up from 75 to 87% to make sure if I lost Riverside, I still won my election. The statistics are the 50 largest cities in the country, and to kind of give you an example, Fort Worth, Texas is number 50, just to kind of give you an example of the size of it. But the 50 largest cities in the country still only have 17% of the population. You cannot ignore 83% of the population and expect to win a presidential campaign on a popular vote system. But you can ignore, today under the current system, you can ignore 85% of the population and win a presidential election. If you think that ignoring today 85% of the population is okay, then the current system ought to stay in place. But under a popular vote system, you couldn't ignore 87% of the population because you'd have to get the most votes. On the whole, I think that's better public policy because in the end, the presidential candidates will be campaigning for every single vote everywhere, instead of under the current system where they're only campaigning for the votes in 6, 8, 10 states.
One other question. In recent presidential elections, how close has the vote been? Do you have any statistics on how close the popular vote compared to the electoral?
Certainly. Obviously, the popular vote has always been closer than the electoral vote, except for perhaps in 2000. But I'll give you a great example. In 2004, George Bush won by 3.5 million votes. Okay. However, had 60,000 votes in Ohio switched, John Kerry would have been the president, and George Bush would have lost, even though he won by over 3.5 million votes, and he still would have won by over 3.5 million votes if those 60,000 votes shifted. It was that close. That's how close the election was in terms of electoral college vote, even though the popular vote was significantly greater for George W. at that time.
Yep, I knew that. That was just a test.
I hope I passed.
And you passed. And just one other comment, you know, if I'm not wrong, 2 of my favorite Republicans endorse the popular vote, and that would be Senator Fred Thompson, I think.
Senator Fred Thompson is a supporter of the compact.
Right, and my other favorite Republicans in the room, Bob Davis. So thank you, sir, for your answers.
I can give you one of my favorite Republicans is Tom Tancredo, and if you followed the illegal immigration issue, which is important in my district, you'd know that Mr. Tancredo is one of the great battlers against illegal immigration in
Representative
this country.
Todd. Representative Todd, you're recognized.
If in fact, you know, I had the concept, if in fact, if you did the popular vote in most of the media markets or your larger media markets, that's where the folks would campaign in. And is that a true statement or not a true statement? I've heard you talk about California, and I just wondered, but would they ignore the other states then, and just go to the large media markets so they can get their message out?
Well, again, when 17% of the people live in those major media markets, they actually campaign only in those media markets to their peril. Actually, you'll probably see a shift in some Midwest media markets cover both battleground and non-battleground states. You'll see an emphasis in sort of those areas. But the biggest, I'll give you a great example in terms of how things will work. 4 southern states, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and South Carolina, delivered a 1.7 million vote margin favorable to George W. Bush in 2004. California gave John Kerry a 1.2 million. If you add up those 4 states' electoral votes that delivered 1.7 million, George Bush only got 33 electoral votes out of that, but John Kerry, by getting a 1.2 million vote total out of California, got 55. Now, in those instances, if you're George W. Bush, where you're going to campaign in a popular vote election, you're going to start building up electors, or you're building up popular votes in those areas where you're strongest, because you're going to want to counter even more the large media market areas. And quite frankly, since most of the United States is rural or suburban and not urban, you're going to find that people will be focusing more on rural and suburban areas, which at this point in time they really don't.
Thank you so much, and again, thank you for coming. As a former national chairman of ALEC, we're glad to have you here in Tennessee.
Thank you.
And members, I think given the gravity of this bill, I know this has very big implications. It's a significant change, and I've had an opportunity to hear arguments on all different sides of the issue. And it's my understanding that I think the University of Tennessee, the Howard Baker Center, is going to be looking at this issue. And we've got an election coming up, which obviously is going to have major consequences. And I think in light of that, and in order for us to help develop our opinions, I mean, there's obviously interesting arguments on both sides. I've heard from the Eagle Forum. They've contacted me, different issues. What I'd like to do, if it's agreeable with the committee here, is do a study on this issue so we can come back, get the facts, look at the ramifications of what we're doing, and make sure that we have all the information available to us. And I've got a feeling this will not be the last time that we're going to see this legislation. So if it's agreeable to the committee, I'd like to make that in the form of a motion, and I'll do that. We need to go back into session if there are no further questions for our guest. Seeing none, Mr. Haynes, thank you very much. And they were
Thank you,
actually
Mr.
singing
Chairman.
Rocky Top for you up above here just a few moments ago. So glad to have you, and thank you for your service. Representative Todd.
Thank you. It sounded like some of them were choking on an orange.
Those Memphis people don't know what they're talking about again. With that, Representative Shepard, did you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Only Representative Todd was tapping his feet up there
Yeah, he
while
was.
Rocky Top was playing, I
that.
guarantee you.
With that, I will make that in the form of motion that we do a study committee and we look at this issue and see where it comes back after the election. Is there a second? Properly seconded. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, ready to vote to send this to summer study. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Haynes.
Next up, Representative Tyndall, I know